The Grand Miracle by Professor C.S. Lewis. Chapter 2 continued. The Dogma and the Universe. There are few places in literature where we are more sternly warned against making man the measure of all things than in the book of Job. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant? Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? In St. Paul, the power of the skies seem usually to be hostile to man. It is, of course, the essence of Christianity that God loves man and for his sake became man and died. But that does not prove that man is the sole end of nature. In the parable, it was the one lost sheep that the shepherd went in search of. It was not the only sheep in the flock, and we are not told that it was the most valuable, save insofar as the most desperately in need has, while the needs has a peculiar value in the eyes of love. The doctrine of the Incarnation would conflict with what we know of this vast universe only if we knew also that there were other rational species in it who had, like us, fallen and who needed redemption in the same mode, and that they had not been vouchsafed it. But we know none of these things. It may be full of life that needs no redemption. It may be full of life that has been redeemed. It may be full of things quite other than life which satisfy the divine wisdom in fashions one cannot conceive. We are in no position to draw up maps of God's psychology and prescribe limits to his interests. We would not do so even for a man whom we knew to be greater than ourselves. The doctrines that God is love and that he delights in men are positive doctrines, not limiting doctrines. He is not less than this. What more he may be, we do not know. We know only that he must be more than we can conceive. It is to be expected that his creation should be, in the main, unintelligible to us. Christians themselves have been much to blame for the misunderstanding on these matters. They have a bad habit of talking as if revelation existed to gratify curiosity by illuminating all creation so that it becomes self-explanatory and all questions are answered. But revelation appears to me to be purely practical, to be addressed to the particular animal, fallen man, for the relief of his urgent necessities, not to the spirit of enquiry in man for the gratification of his liberal curiosity. We know that God has visited and redeemed his people, and that tells us just as much about the general character of the creation as a dose given to one sick hen on a big farm tells it about the general character of farming in England. What we must do, which road we must take to the fountain of life we know, and none who has seriously followed the directions complains that he has been deceived. But whether there are other creatures like ourselves and how they are dealt with, whether inanimate matter exists only to serve living creatures or for some other reason, whether the immensity of space is a means to some end or an illusion, or simply the natural mode in which infinite energy might be expected to create on all these points, I think we are left to our own speculation. On all these points, I think we are left to our own speculations. No, it is not Christianity which need fear the giant universe. It is those systems which place the whole meaning of existence in biological or social evolution on our own planet. It is the creative evolutionist, the Bergsonian or Shavian or the communist who should tremble when he looks up at the night sky, for he really is committed to a sinking ship. He really is attempting to ignore the discovered nature of things, as though by concentrating on the possibly upward trend in a single planet, he could make himself forget the inevitable downward trend in the universe as a whole, the trend to low temperatures and irrevocable disorganization. For entropy is the real cosmic wave, and evolution only a momentary tellurian ripple within it. On these grounds, then, I submit that we Christians have as little to fear as anyone from the knowledge actually acquired. But, as I said at the beginning, that is not the fundamental answer. But, as I said at the beginning, that is not the fundamental answer. The endless fluctuations of scientific theory, which seem today so much friendlier to us than in the last century, may turn against us tomorrow. The basic answer lies elsewhere. Let me remind you of the question we are trying to answer. It is this: how can an unchanging system survive the continual increase of knowledge? How can an unchanging system survive the continual increase of knowledge? Now, in certain cases, we know very well how it can. A mature scholar reading a great passage in Plato and taking in at one glance the metaphysics, the literary beauty, and the place of both in the history of Europe is in a very different position from a boy learning the Greek alphabet. Yet, through that unchanging system of the alphabet, all this vast mental and emotional activity is operating. It has not been broken by the new knowledge. It is not outworn. If it changed, all would be chaos. A great Christian statesman, considering the morality of a measure which will affect millions of lives and which involves economic, geographical, and political considerations of the utmost complexity, is in a different position from a boy first learning that one must not cheat or tell lies or hurt innocent people, but only in so far as that first knowledge of the great moral platitudes survives unimpaired in the statesman will his deliberation be moral at all. If that goes, then there has been no progress but only mere change. For change is not progress unless the core remains unchanged. A small oak grows into a big oak. If it became a beech, that would not be growth but mere change. And thirdly, there is a great difference between counting apples and arriving at the mathematical formula of modern physics. But the multiplication table is used both and does not grow out of date. But the multiplication table is used in both and does not grow out of date. In other words, wherever there is real progress in knowledge, there is some knowledge that is not superseded. Indeed, the very possibility of progress demands that there should be an unchanging element. New bottles. New bottles for new wine, by all means, but not new palates, throats, and stomachs, or it would not be for us wine at all. I take it we should all agree to find this sort of unchanging element in the simple rules of mathematics. I would add to this the primary principles of morality, and I would also add the fundamental doctrines of Christianity. To put it in rather more technical language, I claim that the positive historical statements made by Christianity have the power, elsewhere found chiefly in formal principles, of receiving, without intrinsic change, the increasing complexity of meaning which increasing knowledge puts into them. For example, it may be true, though I don't for a moment suppose it is, that when the Nicene Creed said he came down from heaven, the writers had in mind a local movement from a local heaven to the surface of the earth, like a parachute descent. Others since may have dismissed the idea of a spatial heaven altogether, but neither the significance nor the credibility of what is asserted seems to be in the least affected by the change. On either view, the thing is miraculous. On either view, the mental images which attend the act of belief are inessential. When a Central African convert and a Harley Street specialist both affirm that Christ rose from the dead, there is no doubt a very great difference between their thoughts. To one, the simple picture of a dead body getting up is sufficient. The other may think of a whole series of biochemical and even physical processes beginning to work backwards. The doctor knows that in his experience they never have worked backwards, but the Negro knows that dead bodies don't get up and walk. Both are faced with miracle, and both know it. If both think miracle impossible, the only difference is that the doctor will expound the impossibility in much greater detail, will give an elaborate gloss on the simple statement that dead men don't walk about. If both believe, all the doctor says will merely analyze and explicate the words, "He rose." When the author of Genesis says that God made man in his own image, he may have pictured a vaguely corporeal God making man as a child makes a figure out of plasticine. A modern Christian philosopher may think of a process lasting from the first creation of matter to the final appearance on this planet of an organism fit to receive spiritual as well as biological life. But both mean essentially the same thing. Both are denying the same thing, the doctrine that matter, by some blind power inherent in itself, has produced spirituality. Does this mean that Christians on different levels of general education conceal radically different beliefs under an identical form of words? Certainly not. For what they agree on is the substance, and what they differ about is the shadow. When one imagines his God seated in a local heaven above a flat earth, where another sees God and creation in terms of Professor Whitehead's philosophy, this difference touches precisely what does not matter. Perhaps this seems to you an exaggeration, but is it? As regards material reality, we are now being forced to the conclusion that we know nothing about it, save its mathematics. The tangible beach and pebbles of our first calculators, the imaginable atoms of Democritus, the plain man's picture of space turn out to be the shadow. Numbers are the substance of our knowledge, the sole liaison between mind and things. What nature is in herself evades us. What seem to naive perception to be the evident things about her turn out to be the most phantasmal. It is something the same with our knowledge of spiritual reality. What God is in Himself, how He is to be conceived by philosophers, retreats continually from our knowledge. The elaborate world pictures which accompany religion and which look each so solid while they last turn out to be only shadows. It is religion itself, prayer and sacrament and repentance and adoration, which is here in the long run our sole avenue to the real. Like mathematics, religion can grow from within and decay. The Jew knows more than the pagan, the Christian more than the Jew, the modern vaguely religious man less than any of the three. But like mathematics, it remains simply itself, capable of being applied to any new theory of the material universe and outmoded by none. When any man comes into the presence of God, he will find, whether he wishes it or not, that all those things which seem to make him so different from the men of other times, or even from his earlier self, have fallen off him. He is back where he always was, where every man always is. Do not let us deceive ourselves. No possible complexity which we can give to our picture of the universe can hide us from God. There is no copse, no forest, no jungle thick enough to provide cover. We read in Revelation of Him that sat on the throne, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away. It may happen to any of us at any moment. In the twinkling of an eye, in a time too small to be measured, and in any place, all that seems to divide us from God can flee away, vanish, leaving us naked before Him, like the first man, like the only man, as if nothing but He and I existed. And since that contact cannot be avoided for long, and since it means either bliss or horror, the business of life is to learn to like it. That is the first and great commandment. I have been asked to open with a few words on Christianity and modern industry. Now, modern industry is a subject of which I know nothing at all, but for that very reason it may illustrate what Christianity, in my opinion, does and does not do. Christianity does not replace the technical. When it tells you to feed the hungry, it doesn't give you lessons in cookery. When it tells you to feed the hungry, it doesn't give you lessons in cookery. If you want to learn that, you must go to a cook rather than a Christian. If you are not a professional economist and have no experience of industry, simply being a Christian won't give you the answer to industrial problems. My own idea is that modern industry is a radically hopeless system. You can improve wages, hours, conditions, etc., but all that doesn't cure the deepest trouble, that is, the numbers of people are kept all their lives doing dull repetition work which gives no full play to their faculties. How that is to be overcome, I do not know. If a single country abandoned the system, it would merely fall a prey to the other countries which hadn't abandoned it. I don't know the solution. That is not the kind of thing Christianity teaches a person like me. Let's now carry on with the questions. Question 1. Christians are taught to love their neighbors. How, therefore, can they justify their attitude of supporting the war? Louis. Response by Louis. You are told to love your neighbors as yourself. How do you love yourself? When I look into my own mind, I find that I do not love myself by thinking myself a dear old chap or having affectionate feelings. I do not think that I love myself because I am particularly good, but just because I am myself and quite apart from my character. I might detest something which I have done. Nevertheless, I do not cease to love myself. In other words, that definite distinction that Christians make between hating sin and loving the sinner is one that you have been making in your own case since you were born. You dislike what you have done, but you don't cease to love yourself. You may even think that you ought to be hanged. You may even think that you ought to go to the police and own up and be hanged. Love is not affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. It seems to me, therefore, that when the worst comes to the worst, if you cannot restrain a man by any method except by trying to kill him, then a Christian must do that. That is my answer, but I may be wrong. It is very difficult to answer, of course. Question 2. Supposing a factory worker asked you, how can I find God? How would you reply? Response by Louis. I don't see how the problem would be different for a factory worker than for anyone else. The primary thing about any man is that he is a human being sharing all the ordinary human temptations and assets. What is the special problem about the factory worker? But perhaps it is worth saying this. Christianity really does two things about conditions here and now in this world. 1. It tries to make them as good as possible, that is, to reform them, but also, second, it fortifies you against them insofar as they remain bad. If what was in the questioner's mind was this problem of repetition work, then the factory worker's difficulty is the same as any other man confronted with any sorrow or difficulty. People will find God if they consciously seek from Him the right attitude toward all unpleasant things, if that is the point of the question. Question 3. Will you please say how you would define a practicing Christian, or there are any varieties? Louis. Certainly, there are a great many other varieties. It depends, of course, on what you mean by practicing Christian. If you mean one who has practiced Christianity in every respect at every moment of his life, then there is only one on record, Christ Himself. In that sense, there are no practicing Christians, but only Christians who, in varying degrees, try to practice it and fail in varying degrees and then start again. A perfect practice of Christianity would, of course, consist in a perfect imitation of the life of Christ. I mean, insofar as it was applicable in one's own particular circumstances, not in an idiotic sense. It doesn't mean that every Christian should grow a bread or be a bachelor or become a traveling preacher. It means that every single act and feeling, every experience, whether pleasant or unpleasant, must be referred to God. It means looking at everything as something that comes from Him and always looking to Him and asking His will first and saying, how would He wish me to deal with this? A kind of picture or pattern in a very remote way of the relation between the perfect Christian and his God would be the relation of the good dog to its master. This is only a very imperfect picture, though, because the dog hasn't reason like its master, whereas we do share in God's reason, even if in an imperfect and interrupted way. Interrupted because we don't think rationally for very long at a time. It's too tiring and we haven't information to understand things fully, and our intelligence itself has certain limitations. In that way, we are more like God than the dog is like us. Though, of course, there are other ways in which the dog is more like us than we are like God. It is only an illustration. Question 4. What justification on ethical grounds and on the grounds of social expediency exists for the Church's attitude toward venereal disease and prophylaxis and publicity in connection with it? Response by Lewis. I need further advice on that question and then perhaps I can answer it. Can the questioner say which church he has in mind? Voice. The church concerned is the Church of England, and its attitude, though not written, is implicit in that it has more or less banned all publicity in connection with prophylactic methods of combating venereal disease. The view of some is that moral punishment should not be avoided. Lewis. I haven't myself met any clergyman of the Church of England who held that view, and I don't hold it myself. There are obvious objections to it. After all, it isn't only venereal disease that can be regarded as a punishment for bad conduct. Indigestion in old age may be the result of overeating in earlier life, but no one objects to advertisements for Becomes pills. I, at any rate, strongly dissent from the view you have mentioned. Question 5. Many people feel resentful or unhappy because they think they are the target of unjust fate. These feelings are simulated by bereavement, illness, deranged domestic or working conditions, or the observation of suffering in others. What is the Christian view of this problem? Lewis. The Christian view is that men were created to be in a certain relationship to God. If we are in that relation to Him, the right relation to one another will follow inevitably. Christ said it was difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, referring no doubt to riches in the ordinary sense, but I think it really covers riches in every sense: good fortune, health, popularity, and all the things one wants to have. All these things tend, just as money tends, to make you feel independent of God, because if you have them, you are happy already and contented in this life. You don't want to turn away to anything more, and so you try to rest in a shadowy happiness as if it could last forever. But God wants to give you a real and eternal happiness. Consequently, He may have to take all these riches away from you. If He doesn't, you will go on relying on them. It sounds cruel, doesn't it? But I am beginning to find out that what people call the cruel doctrines are really the kindest ones in the long run. I used to think it was a cruel doctrine to say that troubles and sorrows were punishments, but I find in practice that when you are in trouble, the moment you regard it as a punishment, it becomes easier to bear. If you think of this world as a place intended simply for our happiness, you find it quite intolerable. Think of it as a place of training and correction, and it's not so bad. Imagine a set of people all living in the same building. Half of them think it is a hotel and the other half think it is a prison. Those who think it a hotel might regard it as quite intolerable, and those who thought it was a prison might decide that it was really surprisingly comfortable. So that what seems the ugly doctrine is one that comforts and strengthens you in the end. The people who try to hold an optimistic view of this world would become pessimists. The people who hold a pretty stern view of it become optimistic. Question 6. Materialists and some astronomers suggest that the solar planetary system and life as we know it was brought about by an accidental stellar collision. What is the Christian view of this theory? Lewis. If the solar system was brought about by an accidental collision, then the appearance of organic life on this planet was also an accident, and the whole evolution of man was an accident too. If so, then all our present thoughts are mere accidents, the accidental byproduct of the movement of atoms. And this holds for the thoughts of the materialists and astronomers as well as for anyone else's. But if their thoughts, that is, of materialism and astronomy, are merely accidental byproducts, why should we believe them to be true? I see no reason for believing that one accident should be able to give me a correct account of all the other accidents. It's like expecting that the accidental shape taken by the splash when you upset a milk jug should give you a correct account of how the jug was made and why it was upset. Question 7. Is it true that Christianity, especially the Protestant forms, tends to produce a gloomy, joyless condition of society which is like a pain in the neck to most people? Response by Lewis. As to the distinction between Pentecost and other forms of Christianity, it is very difficult to answer. I find by reading about the 16th century that people like Sir Thomas More, for whom I have a great respect, always regarded Martin Luther's doctrines not as gloomy thinking but as wishful thinking. Not as gloomy thinking but as wishful thinking. I doubt whether we can make a distinction between Protestant and other forms in this respect, whether Protestantism is gloomy and whether Christianity at all produces gloominess. I find it very difficult to answer as I have never lived in a completely non-Christian society nor a completely Christian one. And I wasn't there in the 16th century and only have my knowledge from reading books. I think there is about the same amount of fun and gloom in all periods. The poems, novels, letters, etc. of every period all seem to show that. But again, I don't really know the answer, of course, I wasn't there. Question 8. Is it true that Christians must be prepared to live a life of personal discomfort and self-sacrifice in order to qualify for pie in the sky? Is it true that Christians must be prepared to live a life of personal discomfort and self-sacrifice in order to qualify for pie in the sky? Response by Lewis. All people, whether Christian or not, must be prepared to live a life of discomfort. It is impossible to accept Christianity for the sake of finding comfort, but the Christian tries to lay himself open to the will of God, to do what God wants him to do. You don't know in advance whether God is going to set you to do something difficult or painful or something that you will quite like. And some people of heroic mold are disappointed when the job doled out to them turns out to be something quite nice. But you must be prepared for the unpleasant things and the discomforts. I don't mean fasting and things like that. They are a different matter. When you are training soldiers in maneuvers, you practice in blank ammunition because you would like them to have practice before meeting the real enemy. So we must practice in abstaining from pleasures which are not in themselves wicked. If you don't abstain from pleasures, you won't be good when the time comes along. It is purely a matter of practice. Voice. Are not practices like fasting and self-denial borrowed from earlier or more primitive religions? Lewis. I can't say for certain which bits came into Christianity from earlier religions. An enormous amount did. I should find it hard to believe Christianity if that were not so. I couldn't believe that 999 religions were completely false and the remaining one true. In reality, Christianity is primarily the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. In reality, Christianity is primarily the fulfillment of the Jewish religion, but also the fulfillment of what was vaguely hinted in all the religions at their best. What was vaguely seen in them all comes into focus in Christianity, just as God Himself comes into focus by becoming a man. I take it that the speaker's remarks on earlier religions are based on evidence about modern savages. I don't think it is good evidence. Modern savages usually represent some decay in culture. You find them doing things which look as if they had a fairly civilized basis once, which they have forgotten. To assume that primitive man was exactly like the modern savage is unsound. Voice. Could you say any more on how one discovers whether a task is laid on one by God or whether it comes in some other way? If we cannot distinguish between the pleasant and the unpleasant things, it is a complicated matter. Lewis. We are guided by the ordinary rules of moral behavior, which I think are more or less common to the human race and quite reasonable and demanded by the circumstances. I don't mean anything like sitting down and waiting for a supernatural vision. Voice. We don't qualify for heaven by practice, but salvation is obtained at the cross. We do nothing to obtain it but follow Christ. We may have pain or tribulation, but nothing we do qualifies us for heaven but Christ. Lewis. The controversy about faith and works is one that has gone on for a very long time, and it is a highly technical matter. I personally rely on the paradoxical text, work out your own salvation. Work out your own salvation, for it is God that worketh in you. It looks as if in one sense we do nothing, and in another case we do a damned lot. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, but you must have it in you before you can work it out. But I have no wish to go further into it, and it would interest no one but the Christians present, would it? Would it? Question 9. Would the application of Christian standards bring to an end or greatly reduce scientific and material progress? In other words, is it wrong for a Christian to be ambitious and strive for personal success? Lewis. It is easiest to think of a simplified example. How would the application of Christianity affect anyone on a desert island? Would he be less likely to build a comfortable hut? The answer is no. There might come a particular moment, of course, when Christianity would tell him to bother less about the hut. That is, if he were in danger of coming to think that the hut was the most important thing in the universe. But there is no evidence that Christianity would prevent him from building it. Ambition. We must be careful what we mean by it. If it means the desire to get ahead of other people, which is what I think it does mean, then it is bad. If it means simply wanting to do a thing well, then it is good. It isn't wrong for an actor to want to act his part as well as it can possibly be acted, but the wish to have his name in bigger type than the other actors is a bad one. Voice. It's alright to be a general, but if it is one's ambition to be a general, then you shouldn't become one. It's alright to be a general, but if it is one's ambition to be a general, then you shouldn't become one. Lewis. The mere event of becoming a general isn't either right or wrong in itself. What matters morally is your attitude toward it. The man may be thinking about winning a war. He may be wanting to be a general because he honestly thinks he has a good plan and is glad of a chance to carry it out. That's all right. But if he is thinking, what can I get out of the job, or how can I get on the front page of the Illustrated News, then it is all wrong. And what we call ambition usually means the wish to be more conspicuous or more successful than someone else. It is this competitive element in it that is bad. It is particularly reasonable to want to dance well or to look nice, but when the dominant wish is to dance better or look nicer than the others, when you begin to feel that if the others danced as well as you or looked as nice as you, that would take all the fun out of it, then you are going wrong. Voice. I am wondering how far we can ascribe to the work of the devil those very legitimate desires that we indulge in. Some people have a very sensitive conception of the presence of the devil. Others haven't. Is the devil as real as we think he is? That doesn't trouble some people, since they have no desire to be good, but others are continually harassed by the old man himself. Lewis. No reference to the devil or devils is included in any Christian creeds, and it is quite possible to be a Christian without believing in them. I do believe such beings exist, but that is my own affair. Supposing there be such beings, the degree to which humans were conscious of their presence would presumably vary very much. I mean, the more a man was in the devil's power, the less he would be aware of it. On the principle that a man is still fairly sober as long as he knows he is drunk. It is the people who are fully awake and trying hard to be good who would be most aware of the devil. It is when you start arming against Hitler that you first realize your country is full of Nazi agents. Of course, they don't want you to believe in the devil. If devils exist, their first aim is to give you an anesthetic to put you off your guard. Only if that fails do you become aware of them. Voice. Does Christianity retard scientific advancement? Or does it approve of those who help spiritually others who are on the road to perdition by scientifically removing the environmental causes of the trouble? Lewis. Yes. In the abstract, it is certainly so. At a particular moment, if most human beings are concentrating only on material improvements in the environment, it may be the duty of Christians to point out and pretty loudly that this isn't the only thing that matters. But as a general rule, it is in favor of all knowledge and all that will help the human race in any way. Question 10. The Bible was written thousands of years ago for people in a lower state of mental development than today. Many portions seems preposterous in the light of modern knowledge. In view of this, should not the Bible be rewritten with the object of discarding the fabulous and reinterpreting the remainder? Lewis. First of all, as to the people in a lower state of mental development, I am not so sure what lurks behind that. If it means that people 10,000 years ago didn't know a good many things that we know now, of course I agree. But if it means that there has been any evidence in intelligence in that time, I believe there is no evidence for any such thing. The Bible can be divided into two parts, the Old and the New Testaments. The Old Testament contains fabulous elements. The New Testament contains mostly of teaching, not of narrative at all. But where it is narrative, it is, in my opinion, historical. As to the fabulous element in the Old Testament, I very much doubt if you would be wise to chuck it out. As to the fabulous element in the Old Testament, I very much doubt if you would be wise to chuck it out. What you get is something coming gradually into focus. First, you get scattered through the heathen religions all over the world, but still quite vague and mythical. The idea of a God who is killed and broken and then comes to life again. No one knows where he is supposed to have lived and died. He is not historical. Then you get the Old Testament. Religious ideas get a bit more focused. Everything is now connected with a particular nation, and it comes still more into focus as it goes on. Jonah and the whale, Noah and his ark are fabulous, but the court history of King David is probably as reliable as the court history of Lois 14. Then in the New Testament, the thing really happens. The dying God really appears as an historical person living in a definite place and time. If we could sort out all the fabulous elements in the earlier stages and separate them from the historical ones, I think we might lose an essential part of the whole process, that is, my own idea. Question 11. Which of the religions of the world gives to its followers the greatest happiness? Lewis. Which of the religions of the world gives to its followers the greatest happiness? While it lasts, the religion of worshipping oneself is the best. I have an elderly acquaintance of about 80 who has lived a life of unbroken selfishness and self-admiration from the earliest years and is more or less, I regret to say, one of the happiest men I know. From the moral point of view, it is very difficult. I am not approaching the question from that angle. As you perhaps know, I haven't always been a Christian. I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. I am certain There must be a patent American article on the market which will suit you far better, but I can't give any advice on it. Question 12. Are there any unmistakable outward signs in a person surrendered to God? Would he be cantankerous? Would he smoke? Louis. I think of the advertisements for White Smiles toothpaste saying that it is the best on the market. If they are true, it would follow that anyone who starts using it will have better teeth. Anyone using it has better teeth than he would have if he weren't using it. But you can't test it in the case of one who has naturally bad teeth and uses it and compare him with a healthy Negro who has never used toothpaste at all. Take the case of a sore old maid who is a Christian but cantankerous. On the other hand, take some pleasant and popular fellow but who has never been to church. Who knows how much more cantankerous the old maid might be if she were not a Christian, and how much more likable the nice fellow might be if he were a Christian. You can't judge Christianity simply by comparing the product in those two people. You would need to know what kind of raw material Christ was working on in both cases. As an illustration, let us take a case of industrialism. Let us take two factories, factory A with poor and inadequate plant and factory B with first class modern plant. You can't judge by the outside. You must consider the plant and methods by which they are run, and considering the plant at factory A, it may be a wonder it does anything at all, and considering the new machinery at factory B, it may be a wonder it doesn't do better. Question 13. What is your opinion about raffles within the plant, no matter how good the cause, which not infrequently is given less prominence than the alluring list of prizes? Louis. Gambling ought never to be an important part of man's life. If it is a way in which large sums of money are transferred from person to person without doing any good, example, producing employment, goodwill, etc., then it is a bad thing. If it is carried out on a small scale, I am not sure that it is bad. I don't know much about it because it is about the only vice to which I have no temptation at all, and I think it is a risk to talk about things which are not in my own makeup because I don't understand them. If anyone comes to me asking to play bridge for money, I just say, how much do you hope to win? Take it and go away. Question 14. Many people are quite unable to understand the theological differences which have caused divisions in the Christian church. Do you consider that these differences are fundamental, and is the time now ripe for reunion? Louis. The time is always ripe for a reunion. Divisions between Christians are a sin and a scandal, and Christians ought at all times to be making contributions toward reunion, if it is only by their prayers. I am only a layman and a recent Christian, and I don't know much about these things, but in all the things which I have written and taught, I have always stuck to traditional dogmatic positions. The result is that letters of agreement reach me from what are ordinarily regarded as the most different kinds of Christians. For instance, I get letters from Jesuits, monks, nuns, and also from Quakers and Welsh dissenters and so on. So it seems to me that the extremist elements in every church are nearest one another, and the liberal and broad-minded people in each body could never be united at all. The world of dogmatic Christianity is a place in which thousands of people of quite different types keep on saying the same thing, and the world of broad-mindedness and watered-down religion is a world where a small number of people, all of the same type, say totally different things and change their minds every few minutes. We shall never get reunion from them. Question 15. In the past, the church used various kinds of compulsion in attempts to force a particular brand of Christianity on the community. Given sufficient power, is there not a danger of this sort of thing happening again? Louis. Yes, I hear nasty rumors coming from Spain. Persecution is a temptation to which all men are exposed. I had a postcard signed MD, saying that anyone who expressed and published his belief in the virgin birth should be stripped and flogged. That shows you how easily persecution of Christians by the non-Christians might come back. Of course, they would not call it persecution. They would call it compulsory re-education of the ideologically unfit or something like that. But of course, I have to admit that Christians themselves have been persecutors in the past. It was worse of them because they ought to have known better. They weren't worse in any other way. I detest every kind of religious compulsion. Only the other day I was writing an angry letter to the Spectator about church parades in the Home Guard. Question 16. Is attendance at a place of worship or membership with a Christian community necessary to a Christian way of life? Louis. That's a question which I cannot answer. My own experience is that when I first became a Christian about 14 years ago, I thought that I could do it on my own by retiring to my rooms and reading theology, and I wouldn't go to the churches and gospel house. That's a question which I cannot answer. My own experience is that when I first became a Christian about 14 years ago, I thought that I could do it on my own by retiring to my rooms and reading theology, and I wouldn't go to the churches and gospel halls. And then later I found that it was the only way of flying your flag. And of course I found that this meant being a target. It is extraordinary how inconvenient to your family it becomes for you to get up early to go to church. It doesn't matter so much if you get up early for anything else. But if you get up early to go to church, it's very selfish of you and you upset the house. If there is anything in the teaching of the New Testament which is in the nature of a command, it is that you are obliged to take the sacrament and you can't do it without going to church. I disliked very much their hymns, which I considered to be fifth-rate poems set to sixth-rate music. But as I went on, I saw the great merit of it. I came up against different people of quite different outlooks and different education, and then gradually my conceit just began peeling off. I realized that the hymns, which were just sixth-rate music, were nevertheless being sung with devotion and benefit by an old saint in elastic sideboards in the opposite pew. And then you realize that you aren't fit to clean those boots. It gets you out of your solitary conceit. It is not for me to lay down laws, as I am only a layman and I don't know much. Question 17. If it is true that one has only to want God enough in order to find Him, how can I make myself want Him enough to enable myself to find Him? Louis. If you don't want God, why are you so anxious to want Him? I think that in reality the want is a real one. I should say that this person has in fact found God, although it may not be fully recognized yet. We are not always aware of things at the time they happen. At any rate, what is more important is that God has found this person, and that is the main thing.